Joining us on the broadcast is our guest, Mr. Sreeram Chaulia, who is a foreign affairs expert, also the professor and dean at the Zhenhua School of International Affairs. He's with us on the broadcast. I want to quickly take in a view from him as well. Mr. Chaulia, very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. I want to get a sense from you, fiber optic cables being laid along the LAC. And on the other hand, we also see the sort of, Snoopgate maneuvers that the Chinese have been making in India. How do you add these two together? And according to you, how does it really frame up in the larger scheme of things?
Well, one thing is for sure, the Chinese are the greatest stealers of good ideas. They have a philosophy that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. If other countries have got, some smart new apps or products or services, especially in the digital sphere, we can simply steal them, can simply copy them, mimic them, and appropriate them, So that's how they have stolen a lot of entrepreneurial ideas from Western countries, especially the US. And I'm not at all surprised to see this list in the Snoopgate against India also, because some of our startups, some of our, tech, newbies who are actually innovating are really doing world-class work. And the Chinese believe that, there's no harm in stealing from anybody. Although they look up to Western countries mainly for high-tech ideas, they also know that India has a big talent pool. And one thing is, you're right to say they have some 4 billion plus investment in Indian startups. But on the other hand, this is much bigger, you see, because they're trying to gain insight into the kind of new gen tech scene in India and to try and copy them, because the Chinese always do that. And then eventually, through these investments, they're also going to look for technology transfer.
And Mr. Chaulia, there's one more point that I want to bring to your attention, and perhaps you can elaborate more upon it as we talk. The Traders Association in our country, the Confederation of All India Traders, has been talking about the fact that they never got a level playing field with the Chinese. In fact, the manner in which the competition has been really coming out in the Indian market is that the Chinese had an advantage, keeping in mind the low cost of manufacturing, production, and that is why the Indian products were always a little more expensive. Keeping that into mind, looking and trying to study the Indian consumer, a lot of apps like a Nykaa or a Paytm that have come up. Well, Paytm does have a lot of investment from the Chinese as well. But keeping that in mind, do you think this innovation idea, understanding the Indian consumer, but because from the business point of view, India is a huge market. Look at the sort of ramifications the Chinese had when TikTok was banned in our country.
Well, Chinese investments, they are also looking at new markets because they have surplus capital, and they do look at India as a market that they can penetrate. And through these means, by keeping tabs on potential rivals, they can even squelch rivals and, eliminate them. So this is a kind of a strategic trade policy that they are applying through cyber means, and we should be wary. Already, as you know, after the LAC crisis started this year, we have been, imposing new scrutiny on investments from China. So I think this is a wake-up call for us. We should, across the board, investigate more of the, especially in the tech scene, because artificial intelligence, robotics, payment gateways, these are the kind of things where some of the cutting-edge ideas do exist in India, and they are looking to try and gain an advantage and to overthrow our lead in some of these fields. So I think there's a clear case for us on the basis of this investigation to scrutinize more of the Chinese investments in the country and bar them, and to reduce their ability to control and monopolize the space in our country through these stealth means. Because ultimately, that is the way we can guard our commercial secrets and our trade secrets from being exploited by an adversary. Let's not kid ourselves that China is somehow a partner for us. Commercially, strategically, militarily, it's a competitor and it is an adversary. Let us put that first and foremost.
I want to talk to you more about that point. You're saying that
more Chinese investment is somehow going to be good for us, or will help raise our entrepreneurial abilities.
Okay, you're saying that, we have to realize that Chinese are our adversary. And you're right in saying that, because look at the security situation. The 20 soldiers that died in the Galwan Valley, or the sort of Snoopgate details which are coming on. That being said, China continues to be a big investor, sometimes from the front, sometimes money routed through different venture capitalists in our country, coming through Singapore, Malaysia. We can't deny the fact that this is a globalized world. We can't deny the fact that a lot of Indian companies may have their interests tied up, and I'm talking about some very big leading names who have had tie-ups in the last 1 or 2 years with the Chinese, and the same going for many Chinese companies as well. In a globalized world where economic interests are mostly interdependent, it becomes all the more difficult, Mr. Chaulia.
Yeah, I will stake my reputation on the line and say that, the era of globalization is over now.
Okay.
We are moving into a more nationalistic direction. There are going to be, the tech scene, for example, there is a US-led camp and a Chinese-led camp now. That's clear. And they are vying for, and there is no third really hub of innovation, so to say. So when it comes to investments or interdependence, it makes strategic sense for us from a nationalistic point of view to divest from China as much as possible and to move and to look for alternative partners. Just for an instance, the Japanese investment, cumulative Japanese investment in India since 2000 onwards, the last 2 decades, is 10 times more than that of China. So, we must encourage more investments and collaborations with partners with whom we have strategic trust, and reduce investments with countries who are not only challenging our sovereignty and territorial integrity, but who are known for dubious methods and who have got authoritarian systems and who are completely opposite to our way of life and our political system and our political culture. We cannot get along with them. No. Let us face this as a strategic threat and reduce the reliance or dependence on China. That is Atmanirbhar Bharat.
No, I agree with you. And, the Prime Minister also clarified that Atmanirbhar or self-dependent does not mean isolation. He clarified that, and he said that the global economy is interdependent and we need to become more self-sufficient, at the time contributing to the global economy. That being said, you're talking about the fact that we are moving towards an increasingly, less globalized world where there are nationalistic sentiments, local sentiments that are going to take the center stage, even in shaping up economies across the world. Globalization may not be very old in this world, but our trade relations with China are very old. I mean, in the last 7 decades, if you look at that history, we have been the raw material supplier for China, buying the finished product from the Chinese. That pattern, all of us agree, needs to change. But in the last few decades, ever since we've got independence, that hasn't changed, sir. And with the Snoopgate, with the new internet and age companies coming in, data mining which is happening, it becomes all the more important. But the challenge for our country has been the lack of a manufacturing base.
Yeah, I don't mean that we can immediately become self-reliant with domestic capacity. What I'm saying is look at other suppliers and other vendors. For example, in 5G, we don't need Huawei. We have got our own reliance. We've got, Ericsson and Nokia and Qualcomm and other suppliers and vendors who could actually meet both our cost needs and also our security needs. So I'm saying that, we have to diversify our sourcing. There's a good research by RIS, the think tank, that 75% of the products that we import from China have got good substitutes from elsewhere. So, domestic manufacturing may take us 10 more years in many of the fields. But meanwhile, let us diversify our suppliers base. Let's not be reliant on the Chinese, who are known to use data and to use, digital means to try and capture the minds and imaginations and to dull the senses of adversary countries so that we cannot really challenge them. We don't want to reach a point where we are like Australia. Australia has stood up lately, but historically has become so dependent on China for its economic progress that it could not dare to even criticize it. So I think we should not reach the stage. Rather, we should prize the fact that we have a diversified set of partners. Remember, China is not the largest economic partner of India. The largest partner of India is still the United States.
That's right. That's right.
Services is $150 billion. Let us take it up to $500 billion. What is the harm? End of the day, they don't threaten our sovereignty, and right now they are no longer an imperial power like China is. So what I'm saying is, let us, reshuffle the chessboard and look at some countries more critically now. We cannot afford to think in terms of pure interdependence, liberal, cooperation and all those things. Right now, our national integrity and sovereignty, our digital sovereignty is being threatened.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know, one more point that comes to my mind is there was a point that this was a polarized world during the Cold War era. And India was one of the pioneer countries when we spoke about the non-aligned movement, or we talked about how certain countries on their own can have their own economic interests and yet not be part of certain camps. Talking about regionalism and regional blocks evolving, you're saying that, you know, we could increase our trade relations with the US more. Japan, you're absolutely right in terms of technology transfer, infrastructure and capacity building in our country has been a huge partner, and a very positive one on many fronts, and it's not a country that is threatening the sovereignty, forget India, of any other nation in the world. So I want to understand from you, as regional blocks, especially in Asia, Southeast Asia, could there be a regional bloc emerging that could perhaps counter China's expansionist policies?
See, what we need to do is find an alternative to the RCEP, because we did not join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement last year. 15 countries, including China, joined it. And the fact of, because China was present there and was like the 800-pound gorilla,
right,
and it was going to use this to increase its trade surplus with all the partners, including India, and dump more products. That's why we did not join RCEP. But we do need to find an alternative to it. I mean, we've got a free trade agreements with ASEAN and individually with some countries in our region. But what we need is a larger grouping. And I think that's the complement to the military cooperation that we are establishing with Quad and Quad Plus. On the commercial side, we do need deeper integration with like-minded countries in Southeast Asia, in Northeast Asia, and elsewhere. Because without that, we could be isolated. I mean, you could ask anybody like Australia, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam. They all say that we were hoping that India will join RCEP. But we had good reasons not to join. So they're asking what now? So now that RCEP, because it has become almost a vehicle for Chinese dominance, we have to look for alternatives. Without that, we will not be credible. You know, when we say that we want to lead Asia or we want to be a leading power in the Indo-Pacific, people are saying, what are you putting on the table in terms of connectivity and regional integration? So that's where Japan, India, cooperation. Japan is just getting a new prime minister, Shinzo Abe, but he's going to continue the old policy of deeper cooperation.
Mr. Sreeram Chaulia, I'd request you to please stay on with us. We'll just come back to you and talk more about this very important story. Mr. Sreeram Chaulia, he continues to be with us on the broadcast. Our discussion expected on the floor of the House also, Mr. Chaulia, and let's see what the government has to say on this matter. What are the details that are emerging out? But we've been talking about it yesterday as well. I remember with you on the broadcast that there's a need for a larger regulatory mechanism. There is a need for us to understand that data is our oil. It's also the new superpower. The countries which know how to handle data, protect their own data, would dominate the world politics and discourse in the coming times.
Yeah, this is a wake-up call, no doubt about it. And it's also, I think, a call for action with like-minded countries. So now that we know who all are being targeted, all of them should come together and jointly impose sanctions on this company, which is based in Shenzhen, and name some individuals who are running that company and people who are associated with it. The US usually does it, whenever their data is breached by Chinese firms, they, come up with a list of sanctions and they name these individuals publicly, and they demand that the Chinese government takes some action on them. So we should not simply be defensive. I mean, that is, of course, par for the course, and we should be, patching all the vulnerabilities, our cyber vulnerabilities. That is for the techies. But for the policymakers, the real question is, how can we join hands with other affected countries as part of this Snoop Gate and jointly impose some costs on the Chinese? Because they don't care if one country is raising an accusation. They will always deny. In fact, cyber war is always plausible deniability. They will always say that it's none of us, it's just a figment of imagination and there's no proof or evidence of this. So what we need to do is multiple countries should, call out China for what they're doing and warn them. This is one way of retaliating. There are other means, offensive means also. But in terms of economic policy, we should be very clear. You cannot be snooping and trying to dominate our space and grabbing all our data, which you can then use to hold a gun to our neck in the event of war or in the event of, major conflict. Rather, we will raise the costs of your actions through a variety of responses, cyber responses, yes, but also economic and other policy responses to strengthen our defenses against this intrusive enemy.
I agree with you, Mr. Chaulia, and we shouldn't react. We should respond to what China is doing. As China, they say that things about the next 15 to 20 years, whenever they take any step, we need to have a regulatory mechanism in place to protect the data of our citizens and all important dignitaries as well. Thank you, Mr. Chaulia, as you get us all the important details and your perspective on the story Snoopgate.